For the early birds, this gives you a chance to get into the classroom. We'll wait for a few minutes until we reach the top of the hour. If you have questions that you have arisen because of doing the homework or not doing the homework, you can go ahead and put those in the chat bar at this time. I will be addressing some issues, the ones that I saw created the biggest kind of speed bumps for people. But again, I'll wait until the story begins. All right, here we have Kelly, who is on board. I have to use my husband's phone to see the names because Facebook has assumed that if I see your names, I'm going to take all your information or something. So they won't let me see your name unless you've given them specific permission. So, Hyacinth. Okay, nice to have you on board. I don't think I've seen you post in the group, and if you did, I apologize. And I didn't see you. There's Gloria on board and Connie, B.A. Davis. I have a Facebook user saying hi to Ma. Is that me as in Mary or me as in mom? And Helen, thanks. Robert Harrell for letting me know that I posted my homework on the 2023. I was tracking down people in the 2023, the previous Facebook group, to let them know they were in the wrong group, but it looks like my message didn't get to you. So kudos to Robert who posted some information. And Linda, who is using the Hooks book, which means you're on your way to becoming an official hooker, which I always think is a good thing. Joe, I'm really glad you showed up here because I wanted to let you know I answered your posting on your characters based on if it was a romance, and it's not. So it is more a women's fiction novel. So the relationship creates complications. It's more about her character growth. So excuse me for possibly getting you off target there. It was after the fact that I saw what you posted that I thought you said strong romantic elements, and it is, but it's more a woman's fiction story. So that might help you there. And I'll try and find your original posting so I can get back to it too. Jade's here from Montreal. How lovely. Okay, we've got lots of folks on board. To the individual, and I know you're here because I can see your name, but to that individual who posted under anonymous, I don't think when I reply to anonymous that it notifies you as the person posting. So let's say I was posting, Robert posted something and I respond. I try to make sure that I tag him in the response so he knows quickly that there is a response there for you. But I did not, when you go with the option for being anonymous, that doesn't work. So I did respond to you. And already I jammed up my phone, so that worked up until a certain point. Put it over here. All right, so today, good, it's 4:01. Today we're going to address initially some issues that I kept seeing up here in yesterday's homework. And one of the issues is I probably confused you when I said it was the assignment. And I asked you two questions. What is keeping them from wanting or accepting love? And what do they fear about love? But what I saw answering was most people kind of put two different answers for that, as opposed to putting to answer the question, what's keeping them from wanting is part of their backstory. Some of you did that beautifully. But then it leads into what they fear. So if you had a backstory about abandonment and then put as an answer for what they feared was about not being enough, that's two different fears. So what I was seeing were people who were posting multiple fears instead of going deep into a fear. And what happens there is the more fears that you let the reader know, oh, I have a fear of abandonment, but I have a fear of being ignored, or I have a fear about this, or I have a fear about that. The more that you put on, the harder it is for the reader to understand what's at stake for this character. So when you have 2 or 3 different issues that this person is dealing with, but it's all the same issue in just explained different ways, that's okay. But when you're having them, keeping them from accepting love has nothing to do with what they fear about, then the reader's trying to keep track of at least 2 different issues. And sometimes it was up to 4 issues that the reader is trying to keep track of. And the whole intention of that exercise is to have you go deeper into who your character was and what they really was driving them, what fear was holding them back. And as you move forward in the story, like we'll see today, because we jumped to the middle of the story, you'll see that for the reader, every step that the reader sees that character get closer to love should activate the fear about whatever it is. But if it's about 2 or 3 things, the reader's quickly going to throw up their hands and say, I don't know, I can't track this because I don't know why this person is feeling the way they are. They may have a backstory, but it impacts this and it impacts that. So the clearer you can see, and I was able to answer a lot of people's postings today. So there's lots of examples of it. So feel free to go through people's postings in order to learn from other people's experience. One of the other issues that I saw that was tripping me up was people went to the yesterday's challenge, the video, and started posting their answers at the end of that. So then I would get 23, 25 people that I had to answer in that one line, which made it harder to find their post. The other place that a lot of posts went were to where the homework. When that was posted, a lot of people answered, kind of tagged their answers onto the end of that post. And what I'd like to see, though, is on the home page of the Facebook page, go to the top of that home page and put in the homework hashtag, so hashtag HW1, and that homework in there. That's a standalone response. And that way, if I have to take up a little more room in answering it, I'm not worried that it's making it more difficult for other people to find where their posting is, or for me to find their posting. Also, there weren't a lot, but there were a number of people that posted things twice, maybe because I didn't respond soon enough. But I'm not going to get to everybody's post. I want to tell you that up front and be honest about it. There's only one of me, and there's a lot of postings. So what I try to do is, if I've posted for one of your characters, I try to get somebody else the first of their characters posted, rather than go back and do one person's, especially if they have a long description of their character, and then their second character in the same email. So when you post them from 2 different, that can be so that that type of a posting can take me half an hour or so to answer that one question. And that leaves all the rest of the students not getting their answers. So some people, I just said, I just saw this and I replied in a previous post rather than making the response all over again. So you might, the first response I gave might have been to the second posting. And then I hit the first posting with the same information. And I just try to put a little note that, that saw it, but I have answered elsewhere, hunt for that. So I hope that helps a little bit. And a lot of great stories out there, great answers, some that just need a little tweaking to get really down to what are they afraid of. So we jump in to day 2. Any questions right off the bat? Okay, I'm not seeing anything, so I'll go ahead. Here we are with our mountain. Our story started at that beginning. That was our homework 1, what's happening there. Some people talked about the inciting incident. That was a bonus, but that wasn't what we were looking at. We were looking at understanding the fear that was going to keep that couple apart. Now, if it's a little fear, you can do that little fear by, I don't have time to be involved with someone. Let's face it, when most of us meet our love interest, we might be in college or traveling or in a job and they're in a different job, etc. So that's only going to hold a couple apart for a time period. That's not going to last. The fear should not actually be resolved until about that point 3 on the map, not up here early and quick. So that's what I call by a little fear, that it's inconvenient or that if I've tried to point it out on the exact answers to see that this might be, and that you can use something like that, particularly if you're writing very short. So if you're writing something in the 7 to 15,000 range, you got to have just one fear, and it has to be something that can be overcome with that amount of words explaining what the issue is. So, but as other fears, we want it in the middle of the story. They're going to face that fear in a certain way. But again, at the end of the story, in order to truly overcome that fear, they're going to have an call it a come to Jesus moment there with their fear and really get clear about what it is and how it's keeping them stuck. Because that's what, in truth, the fear does, is keep them stuck from the relationship. So we're right here at the middle of your story. And this is oftentimes which is called a plot point. I call them a twist point because it twists the relationship around and makes a major change to it. There are 2 other major plot or twist points in the story, but we're just going to focus in at this particular plot point. Now, the reason I was asking for word count is here, because when you are looking at your word count, it's going to tell you about where in the story, the middle of the story, what should be happening there, because you have this plot or twist point. But if you don't have a word count, you're writing and you're writing and you're writing, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, it's Tuesday. It should probably throw in a plot or a twist point. And it may be over here at 1.5 or at 2.5. One would happen too soon in the story and the other happens too late. And so you rush it. So that's the whole function of the word count. It's not to put pressure on you or to jam you up with something. It's so that you have a good idea of how much you've written and what type of thing must be happening about this point in your story. So if you're aiming for 100,000 words, you know then that your major plot point is here in the middle. It's often called the crisis point if you're not writing romance. And there's a major change that changes with the relationship here. And again, as you come up to this plot point, you've got a major choice. Sorry, I have a cat that's tearing stuff off the table. You have a major choice. And every time you come to this choice, the reader knows, okay, this is their fear that they're facing, and they're facing it in a little bit of a different way, but it's the same fear. So they recognize this. And this choice is all about, should I act, move forward, or should I stay where I am and be okay with it as it is? There's a decision to be made that can fall right into that, within that choice, but that decision is what actually clues the reader to the action that that character has decided to take. Here are some potential speed bumps if you're not doing that. There's no choice, or there's no decision, or there's no clear action. Thus, what happens is the story is just kind of going along and going along and going along, and nothing changes. Or something just happens to your character. It's like, my God, I'm 100,000 words into this 200,000 word book, and they're still doing the same thing that they did up to this point. If there's nothing, so you as the author throw something at your character. Now, John, that was what I was seeing in your particular story. So as a commercial fiction, your main character was just having, first her father makes the decision about what she's going to do, and then she gets married to a guy she's okay with, but she doesn't love because she loves the first guy. And that stuff that's just, she's being forced into those situations. She's not making any choices. She's just kind of going along with the story. Now, it's not a romance, much more women's fiction. And if it is more women's fiction in a literary sense, that's episodic writing, and that's acceptable. But not in a romance, not in a mystery, not in a suspense, etc. The other thing is forgetting that you're writing a romance. Connie says protagonist needs to have or take agency. Yes, absolutely. That's why we had to understand about that person's fear, because once we understand their fear, when they make their choices and take specific action, some we can say, don't do this. It's going to make things worse. And some we're saying, go. We know it's going to be hard. We know it's going to make you feel bad because that old pain's going to come forward, but it's really important that you take this action. But they don't know that. They don't listen to us all the time. The issue you want to pay attention to, particularly if you are writing a multi-genre story, which means a inspiration paranormal romance. Those are 3 different genres put in. When you hit the major points, like the crisis point in the middle of the story, it has to impact the romance. So, if you're writing and all you're impacting is the external or the suspense story or the mystery part of the story or that type of information, it's not really a twist point. If you're writing romance and you want to get the couple together by the end of the story, you got to make sure something is happening here in the middle of the story that is going to change their relationship. Another issue is not showing your character taking a specific action. This is in the choice and decision process. It is, they can talk to a friend, they can talk to themselves, they can, this is why Forrest Gump was always sitting on, what was it, bus stops and just talking to strangers. And they were helping him make a decision. But then we have to see that action taken that was about based on that decision. Because if there was no action taken and he just stayed at the bus stop and waited for another bus, the story does not change or move forward. In a romance, the action might be, okay, I'm going to go on this date, or I'm going to kiss this other person, or we're going to sleep together. Depending on what you're writing, that action has to be what they're kind of avoiding, because it's going to be making more possible pain in their life, but they take a specific action. Now, the other thing about this action that they're taking is if you are leading this action toward them facing their fear, that's increasing your risks. If not, there has to be some risk to the character here in the middle of the story that is going to, this is why it changes things for them. So if you have a strong romantic element and your main character is trying to solve a mystery here, you would show them in the middle of the story the step that they take towards solving that mystery. And then the romance is going to add complications to that. The romantic interest might say, I told you not to talk to my best friend, or I told you I'm not the killer. But the main character was acting on their external story goals, not about the relationship. So in a romantic element story, here at the middle of the story, you make what's clear to the reader, the risks impacting the character, and then show how it's going to impact the relationship in some way. Random action versus specific action. Random action is you tell your beloved, can you go to the grocery store and get X for dinner? That's very specific. Random is you find it's just, why don't you go out for a while and come back? Now, that doesn't tell the reader anything. It just means that they're leaving the house. It doesn't mean that they are going to do something specific. So when the beloved comes back without anything for dinner, then the other cannot complain because there was no specific action noted that they should be taken. Okay, so what might be happening in the midpoint or the crisis point of your story? And I say in the midpoint, it is not a given you're writing 20,000 words. It's not going to hit at 10,000 on the dot. No, it's in that area. Probably it could be within 1,000 words on either end of that. If you're writing something larger, like 100,000, it could be within 10,000 words of the midpoint of your story. So examples. Again, we're focusing on that specific action, this big blue thing that happens about half the way, and you pull out your word count to determine how close are you in your story. You can use this as in your revision process, or which might mean you need to tighten up someplace or expand, or you can just use it initially that, hey, I'm getting into this ballpark area of the story, and so something big is going down. And that's the big, is right there in the middle. The midpoint or the crisis point is where the romance makes a strong change, all depending on the type of romance you're writing. And if you are writing romantic elements, the romance could impact the external storyline, as in the love interest says something before the midpoint that says, if you do that, I'm not having anything else to do with you. Well, that's going to change the relationship, but the person is still focused on solve the problem, find the killer, whatever they're doing. Or it could happen afterwards. So that is where you're layering in the romantic elements. Again, tattoo this on your arm if you have to, but it's choice, decision, and action. Your main character or both can realize they're getting too involved. Now, this is where, but they do something about it. One might act toward with an attitude of, well, they're going to be leaving anyway, and this might be my only chance, so let's spend some quality time together. Or it could be one is more involved than the other and thus says, I love you. And the other one is not yet ready to say those words because they have different meanings for that character. Your main character or both can be under an illusion about the romance. An illusion is they're never going to care as much as I do, but I'll take what I can get right now. Or meaning one of the characters, if we have sex, we should be satisfied with that. And so everything's going to be okay. That's an illusion. Could have your main character or both acts on the attraction, overcoming their fears or their reason not to act. Now that's going to change the relationship. Doesn't mean the fear is all gone yet. And that's why I pointed out for a couple of you that this is a fear that might be a problem at the beginning of the story, but is not going to last to the midpoint of the story or to the end of the story. One of the things that the reason that you're doing this is you want to see that your main character is seen as growing and changing as a character. That before they hesitated to act toward or encourage the other, that's what they're going to do here in the middle of the story. Starts to change. They're starting to grow. Other potential speed bumps. If the choice is easy to act on and no risk is raised, the risk must occur to the romance as a result of the action taken. So if it was easy for the couple to have sex, if it was easy to have the couple have a kiss, if it was easy for the couple to repeat something they've already done, that's not more risk. Beth Ann here has a story set during World War II with two men. It's male on male, and there's up to the midpoint, the one has waited for the other to take all the actions toward them. But in the middle of the story, if the first one took an action toward the love interest, so instead of just being a passive recipient, stepped forward, even though that was scary, and it turned out really nice. But because that particular character took that action, someone discovered their relationship, which puts both of them at risk. So that's how the risk might escalate after the fact because of the changes to the relationship at this point. If the action is rushed without a clear choice and decision, Your character is simply reacting to what you, as the author, want. And that's where it can be problematic. That they tried to achieve something and it didn't work, so they just returned home and nothing changed. So they tried it again and it didn't work, and they went home and nothing changed. This is not, then you as the writer get frustrated with nothing's changing in my story. It's kind of lost. So what you do is you try something different, but you have to make sure that it's not just on a Wednesday morning, this particular character decides to walk out the front door and go tell the other person that they love them. You have to lead up to that. The choice is they could stay home and have things go on and have the one that they love not quite sure what's going on, or they're going to make a decision that says, I've got to be more assertive and aggressive in how I let my feelings known to the other. So now we know, so the action that will happen out of that is that character will go toward the love interest instead of waiting for the love interest to come and fix things for them. If you are writing a romance, if the action is taken and it does not impact the romance, it's not the midpoint of your story. And this is where oftentimes we can, as writers, get lost and we get focused on the external plot line and we don't make it clear, because it's a lot easier to have to write, there's a battle out here, or the killer's been spotted, let's go find them, that type of a story, than it is to basically look at this couple and what they're going through. Okay, so today's homework, and again, it's going to be filed in the Facebook group that we're in. It's going to be under files, I believe, but don't post your answer. Don't attach it to that posting. Start a new post for me to see, #HW2. So the question is, what happens halfway into your story? I don't need a paragraph by paragraph explanation. What I'm focusing on is how is this, what's happening here, and which character is being impacted, and bringing them a step closer to facing their fears about love. So, example, since she's been working closely with the hero, she's realizing she might have judged him too harshly, either in their past or earlier on, which leads to a dinner together, which then leads to her sleeping with him. Now, that's a stair step, but it is a change to the relationship. Non-romance. While investigating other suspects, he finds himself wanting to believe his former lover is innocent, and he sleeps with her. Up to this point, it's like, don't get involved, don't get closely intimate in any way, because she's still a suspect. But here, he gets caught up in his attraction to her, and it changes the relationship, but it also might change the external storyline, and he might be removed from the case, or he gets dressed down because of his not putting the job first. Here's some tips. Try to keep it close to one sentence. I know it's hard, but it can be, I know you can write long because you're writing novels, even short stories or novellas. So as writers, we tend to think of it in those kind of terms. What's going on? This is that's happening. This is happening there. All I need is here and slept with her. And this is going to be a big change if it hasn't happened before that. For those that are writing on the sexier storylines, this is the point in the story where before they had sex, but things changed. And one took the time to wine and dine the other. That's about a relationship, about, oh, it's not about the sex, it's about seeing the other person. But it is when you, Anna says, so the midpoint crisis, the action must result in the main characters doing something to move them closer or pushes them apart. It can push them apart, but it depends on how you want to use that black moment. That's oftentimes where they're pulled apart before they get over themselves and realize what they're about to lose. So pushing them apart here in some stories is needed to give them time to realize what idiots they've been and to finally try and get back together. But then external events or one gets hurt or something that really makes them realize what they stood to lose at that black moment. Does that help a little bit? So you can do it either way, but this place to me is where the romance changes, but they still have a black moment that we'll talk about tomorrow. So for some writers, they like to have the midpoint of the story and then develop the ramifications of it all the way to that black moment. So I had another question here. I'm looking for the name. Helen, does it have to impact the relationship positively? For example, could the heroine decide not to face her fear and run away? That is something that was used quite a lot pre-1970s. It does change the relationship, and depending on what you're writing, it might be that he recognizes that maybe he needs to woo her more. He was taking it for granted that she was feeling the same things he was, but he never said it. So then that means between the midpoint and the black moment, he's working harder at convincing her that there is a risk to love, but he's willing to take that risk. And I'm just using my hims and my hers. It's not like saying only him, only the male will think that way, or only the female will think that way. So it does have to impact. If it impacts, here's the way I think of it. If it impacts positively, you have another quarter of the book to show the reader how right these two people are for each other. And without that, many times people are writing books and they're rushing them through this and that, and they're dealing with this other thing and all that kind of stuff. And you never really feel, okay, this person are facing their fear. Might not be over it yet, but they're facing their fear, and look at what a great couple this could be. And then you rush right into the black moment. So that's why I often talk about this midpoint as the romance changes. And if it changes to the positive, it means that the reader gets to see not them snipping at each other or having another argument or someone being mean to each other. It gives them a chance to see how, for both of them, they kind of step back and think, this relationship could really work. The thing I'm afraid of this person, particularly if it's an external thing that they're not truthful or not really revealing themselves, this is an opportunity for that in the middle. So the heroine running away or the hero running away doesn't give them that time. And so then the next quarter of the story is about getting them back together again just in time to take them apart at the black moment. So that's something to consider. Leslie says, no, Jacqueline, is the midpoint the first time this happens? What we're talking about is, and you go on, I'm just wondering about all the stuff in between beginning and midpoint. Would there be smaller choices in action along the way? There's absolutely smaller choices. They're building toward this. Tomorrow I'll talk a little bit. There's actually like 11 stages building towards and away from each other until they finally get their acts together. We're just talking about these main points of the story. And definitely there's going to be other things happening that leads up to them. There could be, for example, in Nora Roberts' romances, she usually by the page 60s, in the 60s, she usually has one person take the initiative and have a kiss. So that by the middle of the story, it's easier to understand why they, one more than the other, decide to sleep with one another. But if you're writing something like a Regency or a Sweet or an inspirational romance, we're not going to have a lot of those type of situations. It may be here in the middle that a kiss starts changing the relationship. So there definitely are going to be growing toward this, but this time there's a change. So that midpoint is where that change happens and the relationship changes as a result. So does that help, Jacqueline, a little bit? Leslie says, can one character pull away and choose not to face the fear while the other gets closer to overcoming the fear? If that means the relationship is going to change, yes. So let's say she said, you're right, let's have sex. And they have sex, but he still can't say, I love you. That means he's still staying away from the fear, but she's going for it. And he's justifying, we'll have sex because maybe we'll have that. She'll be happy. That's all we need to do. So it's got to change. It has to impact both of them. And one of them can not face the fear, and one of them can face the fear as much as they can. Linda O'Donnell says, should it be something pretty significant, or can it be something small that draws them together, maybe makes the main character, oops, and then there it went away, look at the love interest in a new light? That's not enough usually in the middle of a story. Unless you're writing a short story or a novella. But that's usually happening about a quarter of the way through the story, when the relationship starts to show the possibility of change, but this midpoint has to be bigger. This might be, I'm thinking of Pride and Prejudice. Midpoint of the story, D'Arcy came to Elizabeth Bennet and says, I want to be your wife. But the way he said it to her and her response to him basically indicated not going to be happening. That was a big midpoint in the middle because he was a very wealthy man. And this could be the relationship, the marriage, that if she turns this down, she might never be married. But it clearly got them together and looking at each other in a different way. If it had just been all the way up to that point in the movie, you can see where he looks at her a little more and she looks at him a little more. Those are smaller steps that gets it to the point that this blow up happens. And that's an example of where the it's like a black moment that are they ever going to get together? But the black moment actually involves the fact that her sister ran off with whatever his name was, the smarmy guy, the militia guy. And to her, that was all over. There would be no way, even as she was ready to consider DRC as a husband, it damaged her family, it damaged her reputation. Her chance is it's not going to go on. So and that's how you use an external storyline or a subplot to shift the attention away from the main plot while these two people stew and somebody else gets together or breaks up or does something. And that pushes the main characters to reevaluate the situation. George Wickham. Thank you, Anna. Every time I see that name Wickham on a person, I really think, I wonder if I would change my name particularly if I lived in an area that was associated more with him. So those are great questions. Now, if you wish to post both characters, do 2 different posts. Don't combine into one. All right. So if Linda does her hero and does her heroine on the same post, that means I'm going to take a lot longer on that post instead of getting to other people's one character. I like to get to everybody, at least one of their characters, but I can't do it if everybody's posting 2 characters at a time. Use the hashtag HW2, so I stand a chance of finding it. And feel free to give feedback to one another, because I've seen great feedback, everything from like Robert explaining how to get somewhere or find something, and even just saying, hey, I love this kind of story. Think about if you get that kind of posting on yours, just makes you justified to keep going. We're not complicated individuals. Sometimes all we need as writers is just one positive attaboy, and that will keep us writing that next chapter, the next scene, or the next part of the novel. So I also want you to have fun with this process. This is as simple looking at story structure as you possibly can do, because we're jumping from the opening to the midpoint of the story, and then tomorrow we'll go to the peak, the black moment. If you're not writing romance, we go to the climax of the story. It's the same place in the book, so it gives you an idea of what it's going to do. But if you're not having fun in this process, and in being a writer, and fun in the sense of, yes, I can do this. I've met a lot of people. I'm looking at the positive things, even if I get a rejection, that means you're in the game and you can keep going. So questions about either what we discussed today, the new homework that's happening in the middle of your story, or what feedback I've given to you. I should apologize in advance. I am not one of those instructors that's going to tell you it's great if I don't think it's great. If I think it needs some work, I think it's better for me to point out what the issues are. All right, somebody here said, looking at the homework question, I'm not sure how it impacts only one of the characters. Do you mean today's homework or yesterday's homework? Because in a relationship, you've got the 2 people. And one person's fear is based on their background and who they are. The other person's fear is based on their background and the other. So, all right, thank you. You're talking about today's homework. Well, today's homework is what happens halfway through the story. If you take it from her point of view, she's facing her fear by accepting this action. But you go to his, and she's going to tell him she loves him and hopes that he does that to her. But then you go to him, the second character, and it's like, oh, she says she loves me. So that means we might have sex. So that means I don't have to do anything more about facing my fear. So that's how you do it. Both of them are involved in whatever is going on in the middle of this story. So you do it from one person's point of view first, and then the second person's point of view. Does that make a little more sense there? Connie says you learned so much by reading my comments to other answers and other people's comments and their questions too. So that's the whole group. The whole purpose of being there and having all those postings is that there's a lot of examples to show you and how you do it in a different subgenre of romance that can help you if you decide to move along the way. So, and I'm sorry, I don't see your name here. So your response in that example, I would do her point of view. Yes, you can do just her point of view. What I was saying was if you do both their point of view, I will do whichever one I run across first, and then make sure I get other people's done too, at least one of their characters, before I come back and start doing the second character. So you can do both, just post them separately. So it's not her and him. Paulette says, I appreciate you telling me to dig deeper. Yes, that's much nicer than my normal response that is a bitch slap saying, okay, and that's where the dig deeper is literally the answer's there. It's closer. You're almost there. But you just, because you know the whole story or what's gone on up to this point, you have all this. Writing is hard. And this is one of the reasons it is hard, is because we have to be down there, not up against the trees in the wood, we're up against the bark, because we've got so many things we're trying to keep track of with our characters. So what I'm doing with you in this particular course is pulling you back and saying, you know what you mean by this, a bad thing happened in their past, but the reader doesn't necessarily mean it. Okay, so that's sometimes where you have to get perspective by stepping back. It helps to leave it for a while sometimes and dig into it again. So Joe Ryan, I think that's you there. And he says, I think I heard you say my story is women's fiction. Am I correct? Yes, it's more her story about her moving from independence by going to school, etc., but then going into the marriage. She's reacting to her other people's demands all the way up to her Black moment, where she reconciles that the fact that she is now married with someone and she can live to be happy with him. That's not romance. It is a relationship story, but it's not romance. So I apologize. I gave you feedback based on the fact that it was really hard to see her personality, because all she was doing was reacting to what her dad wanted, what her mom wanted, what her new husband wanted, what the new in-laws wanted, but I did not see her. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that's probably why is this is not a romance. This is a women's fiction story. It's about, depending on her age, it could be a coming of age story. Okay, does that help a little bit? And I'll admit I screw up sometimes in my answers, thinking you're writing, that I remembered you're writing X. And then finding out, wait a second, I may have spun you off in a different direction that is not applicable to what your story is that you want to write about. And if I do that, just let me know. And then I can step back, because I can't always remember what everybody said. I'm writing in this multi-genre, etc. Anna says, not sure you saw this, so I'll ask again. So the action that takes at the midpoint taken by one character is what you want in our homework. What I'm saying is you can do it for both characters because it's a romance and it impacts both characters, but post them as two different posts. Don't post one long post about her and then show him in the same post, because those are harder for me to get to and longer answers required. And it also, without realizing it, somebody are thinking this is, he's doing this, but it's nothing about his fear. It's more about what she is doing. And that's the character that a person is more the author is more engaged with. So they actually end up answering the question, not as two different points of view, but one point of view. Anna says, but the answer should show the action they've taken. Yes, absolutely, show the action. It can show the choice, it can show the decision, it can show the action, but keep it short. And if you need to post it, her, him, her, him, whatever the situation, and use their first name if that helps, to make it that it helps orientate me as to whose point of view it is in your story. Beth Ann says, so it's not the event that drives them to make a choice or face their fear. That can, a event can give them a choice to face their fear here in the middle or do something that changes the relationship. But it is not, no, that is a reaction. If you just have an event happen and this is a reaction to that event, where's the choice? Where's the decision? And where's the action that is going to change the relationship then? So Beth Ann says, meaning that you're not asking for the event. No, I don't need to ask for the event because the action that they decide to take is going to create the new event. I don't care about the past event. Tonya says, can you have a coming of age story in book 1 of a trilogy becomes a romance in book 2? It depends, Tonya. If you're going with a traditional publisher, small publisher, or a big publisher, you want to ask them that question. Some will not allow it. But if you're doing indie publishing, you can probably do it and get away with it. Okay, someone's asking, you've defined what's not a romance. Define a romance. Well, a romance is basically this person and that person who has a fear, different fears, of getting involved or committing to one another, or trusting one another, or making themselves vulnerable to one another, because that's what romance is all about, but in different ways for different people, so that by the end of the story, they get beyond the fear that held them apart from the other and can move towards either a happy forever after or a happy for now, meaning we're together as a couple. We're not sure what's going to happen in the future, but we've made some kind of commitment to one another. And that's all what the romance is. That fear that we show at the beginning of the story, each character has to overcome it in their own way. They might have some external events that are also creating challenges for them. They could have relatives or best friends or whatever are creating conflict. Those are external conflict to them. But the biggest thing is the internal fears that they have about love. Linda says, without the happy ever after or the happy for now, it could be a love story, but isn't a romance. Exactly. You can have the relationship, but it's not a romance. It's not about how can these two people, there's so many things that can get away with finding the right person, that story, that's what the reader wants to find out. How does this couple overcome what challenges internally that they're facing, stopping them from loving another to get together? And the romantic elements is how the relationship can impact whatever the external goal is. And it can be a love story, but it's not about do they get together. That's not the major question of the book. It's about that, and in romance, it is the major question. Okay, so did that answer the question for the individual that asked it? Define a romance? Okay, somebody has said, thank you. Just auditing this time, so won't add to your onus. Still enjoying and getting inspiration from your classes. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Linda talks about Nicholas Sparks writes a lot of love stories, but they aren't true romances since they don't basically end happily or end with the couple together. They might be together. It's about understanding the relationship. And Nicholas Sparks will be one of the first ones that tells you he doesn't write romance. He writes relationships. And they were looking for, when he was submitting to editors and agents his first manuscript, they were looking for a replacement for Bridges over Madison. That was not a romance either. It was a relationship story. So the publishers were looking for that next big one. And the editor who eventually took Nicholas's work on, he sent it to one of her co-agents, and I think she was an agent rather than, because she read it and she was touched by it. And she said she rarely got touched by a story. And so she sent it back to him and asked him could he write it and bring more emotion into it. Now, this is something when you're a brand new writer, many times the agent or the editor will say that, can you do that? And he did. I think his job at the time, he was a pharmaceutical rep, so he was on the road a lot of time. a lot of the time. So he rewrote it, and she said it showed her that he could take feedback, but also knew how to add more emotion to it. So she became his agent, and she put it up for auction. And as a newbie, this must have been 20 years ago now. But I think at that time he got like a $50,000 advance for the first book and got a 3-book deal. So he was set to take off as a result of that. So if an agent or an editor asks you to do something, it's not just to jam you up. Sometimes it is that it ends up because they don't understand what it is you were aiming for, but understanding why they're asking you. Can you rewrite it? If it's something like, can you change your sweater color to red? And yes, I got that request once. You're not going to say no just to say, this is my heart and soul. It has to be a blue sweater. So any other questions here today? I think we're just a little bit over the hour mark. I don't like to keep you too long. And so Tech Guy will be sending you, those he has your email address, he'll send you a copy of the homework, but he'll also send you or post it in the Facebook group. So I appreciate those making the commitment to get here. I know it's not always easy, but it is a chance to learn from one another and to ask questions in the moment. All right, somebody says, sorry, but I missed who you were talking about. I think it was about Nicholas Sparks. Okay, that was before he was ever published. He did not write romance, but she knew that his type of story could fill that hole that was made from people who had read Bridge Over Madison County, whatever that story was. Okay, I will see you tomorrow, same place, same time, and new set of information about your story and what comes next in it. So I'll get back to the homework here in just a bit. All right, take care.